The morning started like any other in our quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where people wave politely but keep to themselves. My wife, Emily, 7 months pregnant with our first child, was glowing despite the exhaustion that came with carrying our son. We'd moved here a year ago, drawn by the promise of a peaceful life, good schools, and a community that seemed to embody the American dream. But peace was a fragile thing, and it shattered the day Karen, HOA president, decided she'd had enough of us. Karen was the kind of person who thrived on control. She wasn't just the head of the homeowners association, she was its dictator, patrolling the streets with a clipboard and a glare that could curdle milk. Her rules were gospel. Grass couldn't be a millimeter over 3 inches, mailboxes had to be a specific shade of navy blue, and God help you if your recycling bin lingered on the curb past 7 a.m. We'd had run-ins with her before, mostly petty complaints about our car parked an inch too far from the curb or a stray weed in our flower bed. Emily, ever the peacemaker, would smile and nod, promising to fix whatever Karen nitpicked. I wasn't as patient, but for Emily's sake, I bit my tongue. That morning, though, something shifted. Karen wasn't just nitpicking anymore, she was out for blood. It started with a letter, one of those passive-aggressive WA notices slipped into our mailbox. This one claimed our front yard decorations, a small ceramic gnome Emily loved and a few potted plants, violated some obscure clause about excessive ornamentation. The letter demanded their removal by noon or we'd face a $500 fine. Emily, hormonal and stubborn, refused to comply. "It's our yard," she said, her voice trembling with defiance. "She doesn't get to tell us what makes us happy." I agreed, but I suggested we talk to Karen calmly, maybe reason with her. Emily shook her head, her jaw set. "I'll handle it," she said, and before I could stop her, she waddled out the door, her pregnant belly leading the way. I stayed inside, finishing up some work emails, assuming Emily would exchange a few sharp words with Karen and come back fuming but unharmed. I was wrong. 10 minutes later, I heard a scream, Emily's scream. My heart dropped, and I bolted outside, bare feet slapping the pavement. There, in the middle of our front lawn, was Emily, crumpled on the grass, clutching her arm and sobbing. Karen stood over her, holding a garden rake like a weapon, her face twisted with rage. Our gnome lay shattered nearby, and the potted plants were overturned, soil spilling like blood. "What the hell happened?" I roared, rushing to Emily's side. She was pale, her breathing shallow, and her right arm hung at an unnatural angle. Karen didn't back down. She attacked me. She shrieked, brandishing the rake. I was defending myself. "She's the one who broke the rules." I barely heard her. My focus was on Emily, who whispered through gritted teeth, "She pushed me, then swung that thing." I called 911, my hands shaking as I cradled Emily's head. The ambulance arrived quickly, and as the paramedics loaded her onto a stretcher, Karen kept ranting about property values and disrespect. I wanted to strangle her, but Emily needed me more. At the hospital, the news was grim. Emily's arm was broken in 2 places, a clean fracture that would require surgery and months of recovery. The doctors were concerned about the stress on her pregnancy, so they kept her overnight for monitoring. Sitting by her bedside, watching her sleep under the harsh fluorescent lights, I felt a rage I'd never known. Karen hadn't just hurt my wife, she'd endangered our unborn child. I wanted justice, but more than that, I wanted Karen to feel the weight of what she'd done. She thought she was untouchable, hiding behind her WA rulebook and her self-appointed authority. She was wrong. The next morning, after ensuring Emily was stable, I started digging. Karen's power came from her position, but that position rested on the HOA's bylaws and the neighborhood's willingness to tolerate her. I'd never paid much attention to the WA before. Most people don't until it bites them, but I knew Karen's reign wasn't absolute. She'd made enemies. Neighbors whispered about her bullying, her fines, her obsession with control. I just needed to find a way to turn her own weapons against her. I started with the HOA bylaws, a dense, 50-page document I found online. It was mind-numbing, but I read every word, fueled by coffee and fury. Buried in the fine print was a clause about conduct unbecoming of an officer. It outlined a process for removing an HOA president if enough residents petitioned for a vote, provided there was evidence of misconduct. Assaulting a pregnant woman seemed like a pretty clear case of misconduct to me. But I needed proof, and I needed allies. The proof came easier than I expected. Our neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, a quiet retiree who kept to himself, had a security camera pointed at our front yard. He'd seen the whole thing and was happy to share the footage. Karen's been a menace for years, he muttered, handing me a USB drive. About time someone stood up to her. The video was damning. Emily, calmly talking, gesturing at the gnome. Karen, red-faced, shoving her. Emily stumbling, falling. Karen swinging the rake, catching Emily's arm as she tried to shield herself. It was assault, plain and simple. I made copies and sent one to the police, who were already investigating based on Emily's statement. The allies took more work. Karen had intimidated most of the neighborhood into compliance, but not everyone. I knocked on doors, starting with the people I knew had grudges. Mrs. Alvarez, fined for her kids' chalk drawings on the sidewalk. The Patels, harassed over their Diwali lights. The Wilsons, who nearly lost their house over a missed HOA fee Karen refused to waive. One by one, they agreed to sign a petition for a special meeting to vote Karen out. Some were hesitant, fearing retaliation, but the video changed their minds. She could have killed your wife, Mrs. Alvarez said, her eyes wide. And your baby. She's gone too far. Within a week, I had 30 signatures, more than enough to call the meeting. I filed the petition with the HOA board, a group of 4 other residents who seemed as tired of Karen as everyone else. They scheduled the meeting for the following Saturday, and I spent the days leading up to it preparing. Emily was home by then, her arm in a cast, her spirit bruised but unbroken. Don't let her win, she told me, her voice steady despite the pain. I promised her I wouldn't. The meeting was held in the community center, a sterile room with folding chairs and a podium Karen usually dominated. This time, she was on the defensive. About 50 residents showed up, a mix of her loyalists and those I'd rallied. Karen tried to control the narrative, claiming Emily had provoked her, but I was ready. I played the security footage on a projector, letting the images speak for themselves. Gasps filled the room as Karen's rake connected with Emily's arm. This isn't leadership, I said, my voice shaking with controlled anger. This is abuse. She's not protecting our community, she's terrorizing it. Karen's face went white, then red. She stammered, tried to deflect, but the room was turning against her. One by one, neighbors stood up, sharing their own stories of her tyranny. The vote was swift. 42-8, Karen was removed as president. She stormed out, threatening lawsuits, but the police were already building a case based on the assault. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing. Karen's reign was over, and I'd used her own rules to bring her down. The hospital room was sterile, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones no matter how many blankets you pile on. My wife, Emily, lay in the bed, her face pale but defiant, her right arm in a cast from elbow to wrist. The doctor had just left, confirming the fracture was clean but would take weeks to heal. She was 6 months pregnant, and the sight of her in pain, her belly swollen with our daughter, made my blood boil. The story of how we got here was absurd, infuriating, and straight out of a suburban nightmare. It all started with Karen, our HOA's self-appointed enforcer, whose obsession with rules had escalated from petty complaints to outright assault. But she didn't know I'd spent years studying the very weapon she wielded, HOA bylaws, and I was about to turn her world upside down. It began 3 weeks ago, when Karen started her crusade against our front yard. Emily had planted a small garden, a patch of wildflowers to brighten the lawn and give her something to nurture during her pregnancy. It was her sanctuary, a way to cope with the stress of expecting our first child. The flowers weren't regulation approved, though. HOA rules demanded uniform grass, no exceptions. Karen sent us a letter, then another, each more threatening than the last. Fines piled up, $50 a day, until we were staring at a $1,200 bill for a garden that cost us $30 in seeds. Emily, stubborn and hormonal, refused to tear it out. "It's our property," she'd said, her voice trembling with conviction. "She can't control everything." I agreed, but I knew Karen wouldn't stop. I'd dealt with her type before, power-hungry busybodies who treat HOAs like their personal fiefdoms. I'd spent years as a paralegal before switching to IT, and during that time, I'd seen how HOAs operated, how their bylaws could be twisted into knots by someone who knew them well. Karen didn't know I'd read our HOA's 47-page governing document cover to cover when we moved in, anticipating trouble from neighbors who eyed our beat-up hatchback with disdain. I'd kept that knowledge in my back pocket, a quiet ace for a moment like this. The confrontation came on a humid Saturday morning. Emily was watering her flowers, her belly straining against her sundress, when Karen stormed across the street, clipboard in hand, her face pinched like she'd bitten a lemon. I was on the porch, sipping coffee, close enough to hear but not to intervene in time. Karen started yelling about violations, fines, and community standards. Emily, never one to back down, told her to leave. That's when Karen lost it. She grabbed the garden hose from Emily's hand, yanking it hard. Emily stumbled, tried to catch herself, and fell against the stone edging of the garden. I heard the crack before I saw her clutch her arm, her face crumpling in pain. I was at her side in seconds, calling 911 while Karen stood there, stammering about how Emily shouldn't have resisted. The paramedics arrived, and as they loaded Emily into the ambulance, I glared at Karen, who had the gall to mutter about filing another complaint. My rage was a living thing, coiled and ready to strike, but I held it back. I knew something she didn't. Her weapon, those bylaws, was about to become mine. At the hospital, while Emily rested, I pulled out my laptop and started digging. The HOA bylaws were dense, but I'd memorized the key sections. Karen's power came from her position as HOA president, but she wasn't untouchable. The bylaws required officers to act in the community's best interest, avoiding conflicts of interest and personal vendettas. Karen's behavior, her relentless targeting of us, her physical altercation with Emily, violated multiple clauses. More importantly, I found a section on emergency meetings, which could be called with a petition from 20% of homeowners. If I could rally enough neighbors, I could force a vote to remove her. The next day, I started knocking on doors. Our neighborhood had 50 homes, so I needed 10 signatures. Most people knew Karen's reputation, her fines for unapproved mailboxes, her tirades about trash cans left out too long. But she'd intimidated them into compliance. I told them about Emily's arm, showed them pictures of her cast, and explained how Karen's actions broke the bylaws. Slowly, I got nods, then signatures. By evening, I had 12, more than enough. I filed the petition that night, emailing it to the HOA board and copying every homeowner I could find. The bylaws required a meeting within 10 days, and I requested one for the following Saturday. Karen responded within hours, her email dripping with condescension, claiming the petition was invalid and frivolous. But she couldn't stop it. The rules were clear. The meeting was set. Over the next week, I prepared like I was going to war. I printed copies of the bylaws, highlighted relevant sections, and gathered evidence. Photos of Emily's garden, the hospital report, and even a neighbor's security footage showing Karen's outburst. I also found something juicy. Karen had been using HOA funds to maintain her own lawn, claiming it was community beautification. Receipts from the landscaping company, obtained through a public records request, showed thousands of dollars funneled to her address. It was a clear conflict of interest, a violation that could not only oust her but expose her to legal liability. The meeting was held in the community center, a stuffy room packed with 30 homeowners. Karen sat at the front, her usual clipboard replaced by a smug grin. She thought she'd steamroll this, like always. I stood up, calm but deliberate, and laid out the case. I started with Emily's injury, showing the medical report and the video of Karen yanking the hose. Gasps rippled through the room. Then I moved to the bylaws, reading aloud the sections on officer conduct and conflicts of interest. I presented the landscaping receipts, pointing out how Karen had misused funds. Finally, I called for a vote to remove her as president, citing her actions as detrimental to the community. Karen's face went from smug to scarlet. She sputtered, claiming I was lying, that the receipts were misinterpreted, that Emily had provoked her. But the neighbors weren't buying it. One by one, they spoke up. Stories of Karen's bullying, her selective enforcement, her threats. When the vote came, it was unanimous. Karen was out. The room erupted in applause as she stormed out, muttering about lawsuits. But I wasn't done. With Karen gone, the new interim president, a quiet guy named Tom who'd signed my petition, agreed to waive our fines and revise the landscaping rules. Emily's garden was safe. I also filed a police report for the assault, and the prosecutor was considering charges. Karen's reign was over, but the real victory was seeing Emily smile again, her hand resting on her belly as she watered her flowers with her good arm. Looking back, I realized Karen's biggest mistake was underestimating us. She thought her bylaws were a club to beat us into submission, but I knew they were a double-edged sword. By turning her own rules against her, I didn't just protect my family, I dismantled her empire. And as Emily's arm healed, our daughter kicking stronger every day, I knew we'd won more than a fight over flowers. We'd reclaimed our home.